there nearly every summer and spend probably around a week, maybe a little longer. And at times we'd travel to the Shama River, which was north of his place, and we'd fish. I remember a time that I was probably around 6 years old, and I had walked with my daddy down the river to look for a place to fish. And we found a large rock just a few feet from the bank. And a portion of the rock was close enough. Probably looking back then, it was a lot longer, wider than it is now. But anyway, there was a portion where you could just kind of step from the bank over onto the rock, and Daddy helped me get up there. And of course, he was beginning fishing. And they were letting water out. It was El Vado Dam or lake. I don't know if you may be familiar with it, truck driving, but anyway, it was. They were letting water out of that river, and I mean that water was raging. I mean it was, but the water between the rock and the river was calm. So being impatient, a kid wanting to explore, well, I decided to jump from the rock to the bank. Well, I didn't make it, and I stepped foot, and I thought, well, it's just shallow. Well, I stepped foot in the water, and I went under, and I don't know what made my daddy look behind him, because he had his back to me fishing the rapids. But I don't know what, when he looked back, saw me struggling, he quickly jumped in, got a hold of me and set me on the rock. And after the danger was over, I remember my dad asking me, do you know how to swim? I said, no. He said, well, you were then. And strangely, I was able to swim ever since that. But, what caused him to look back? And that river was so raging you couldn't hear. And but he did. And I say it's God's grace and that he looked back. And what's strange about it, it happened so fast. He jumped in the water, got me on the rock, and crawled out, pulled his billfold and stuff out of his pockets, and it wasn't even wet. That was quick. That was fast. Of course, me, I couldn't sit still very long. I always had to go do something, But like I said, if I'd have fell on the other side of the rock, it would have been over. There's no way it could have saved me. Like I said, them rapids were running so fast and hard, and I wouldn't be here today. But it was God's grace, that kept me from drowning. And I'm sure nearly all of us, we've all had probably, and there's other probably instances where it was God's grace and His providence that saved us. And all the praise and glory goes to God. I always look at it, He wasn't through with me. And all of each of y'all that maybe had experiences where and maybe drive up on you, maybe you had a flat or something held you up, and you drive down the road and there's a wreck. Did God save you from that? Only God knows. And of course, we first off being impatient. I got to go. There's whole things holding me up, and then you get up the road and there's a wreck. And oh, I know it's hard not to be. Yes, and all of us could share instances where things such as gosh, Seth, I don't know how many wrecks he's walked away from that it should have taken his life or seriously injured. But as we look at today's lesson text that was written by David, he was in his latter years in life, and I think looking back at how God had His hand on him through his trials and tribulations, plus the spiritual strength he had gained by honoring God and His statutes. Temptations that David was faced. What was I can't remember what Jeremiah said about Joseph, the temptation, a quote that some preacher made about temptations. I can't remember what it was now. Huh? Well, you're supposed to. Yeah. It was just 30 minutes ago. Yeah. Yeah. It's something like, I don't have any problems other than temptations. Something kind of like that. But let's look at our lesson text now, Psalms 18. Somebody read verse 16 through 19.
You reach down from on high
Oh, that's some powerful words, isn't it? But you know, I think if you haven't already, I challenge you to go back and read the whole chapter of Psalm 18. I think it's the second largest chapter in Psalm, or third, I think, third longest, I believe. But it said if you look at 2 Samuel 22, it parallels chapter 18. I can't wait till we get to chapter 22 in Samuel, 2 Samuel. Yeah, 20 chapters to go. Yeah, we'll get there. But during his reign as king, David reflected on the number of ways the Lord had taken care of him. Long before he became king of Israel, he had survived Saul's repeated attempts to kill him in 1 Samuel 17:31. Psalm 18 begins with a call to praise. David expressed his love for the Lord, who had been faithful to rescue him from his enemies. You know, we can look at it, how many times Saul tried to take David's life. Threw that spear at him. And, you know, I said, I think I've talked to Brother Steve before about it. I sometimes wonder if Saul wasn't bipolar. And he could have been. Everything was just fine and hunky-dory, and then there's times he just went off the deep end. Just went the ballistic. Yeah, manic depressant, yes. But he went on to describe the anguish he had faced as he found himself at death's door. He turned to the Lord and pleaded for help. The Lord heard his cry and reached to his desperate predicament. The Lord reached down and he took me. I like them words, and he took me. This suggests placing something in someone's hand, carrying. God placed David in his protective hand. Now, the NIV reads, he took hold of me. In other words, God reached down to David. So many times, David said, he took hold of me. He took me in his hands. You know, it's a picture of a person drowning, and God reaches down, his hand lifts them out of the waters. We probably can't count the times God has reached down and rescued us from the raging waters of life. You know, I think of another incident when we were kids. We'd go to Lampasas River and go fishing and swimming. And I don't know why, my cousin and I were on one side of the bank of the river, and my dad and some of his brothers, I don't remember who all, but I decided to want to go across the other side. Well, my cousin was taller than me, so I held on to his shoulders. We went wading across. Well, I went under. His head was still above. And I believe, I can't remember, I believe it was my uncle that yanked me out of the water. But I know it. No, not taking me fishing. But I do remember, I think it's about the same place. It's another example, another story, but putting our trust in the Lord. You know, before I could swim, I could be on the banks of a river up on a rock brook, and my daddy would be in the water, and he'd say, jump. I was off into the water. It wasn't no hesitation, but it was because I knew he would be there to catch me and grab me, and that's the same with God. We know he's there. We're in his hands. But we probably can't, like I said, count the times God has reached down and rescued us from raging waters. You know, I can't help but think of the tragic loss of lives in this recent floods and many questions we may have. Some will never be answered. It's still 170-something, 100 that still probably never find them. You know, I saw an interview of a man who was working with the search and rescue who lost his wife and children in the Blanco River in flood in Wimberley in 2015. And he was a man of faith. He said, you know, he said they never did find the bodies. But he said, I'll be joined with them in heaven. And, you know, great man of faith. And they said, I forget how many miles he was carried down the river. I was talking to some at the breakfast the other day, but I think he found it as a bridge where he stopped him. But he said, I forget, he said that after I don't know how much later, but after the waters had receded, and he got in I can't think, but a boat and rowed down the river. It's 11 miles, and it took him several hours to get down there. When it was just in that flood, it was just a matter of minutes while he was swept down there. But, you know, I thought so much a man of faith and belief in God. You know, we probably many still want to just reach out and lash out at God. And why did you do this? Sometimes I don't think we'll never know, and the politics involved, and I won't even get into that. But yes, yes, yeah, right.
That's why I think that raises the question that you brought up earlier.
Mm-hmm.
God says, do you trust me?
Yes, right. Yes, and we put our total complete trust in Him. We must. But like I said, I don't think you'll ever get over the loss and question, why did he survive? Can you imagine the guilt this man had? Why did I survive and the rest of my family were lost? But like I said, he knows that we'll be together. We'll be joined together again in heaven. And that's the only hope that we have sometimes. You know, we've lost loved ones. And that's the hope that we have in God, that we'll be joined together in heaven. Yes. 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 And I think him working with the search, can you imagine the memories that come back on him, what he's going through while he's searching for bodies? And I mean, they're gone. I mean, we probably never will recover all of them. Yeah. Yeah. Sure. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Right. Sure. Right. Yeah. No. No. Yeah. Like I said, when Aaron passed away in the hospital, Lou Ellen and I had to console the chaplain. Yeah. You were going to say something, Les? You forgot now. Train of thought. Put you on the. Yeah. Okay. She stole your thunder, huh? Yeah. But you know, like deep water, his foes had the power to take his life, but God delivered me. David understood that they were too strong and mighty for him, so he learned to lean on God's strength to deliver him. And our foes are too strong for us. You know, and all that's what to do is to lean on the Lord's strength in him. In the moment of extreme weakness, his enemy attacked. You know, isn't that the way it works? In our weakness, the enemy will attack. This violent aggression would have destroyed David, but the Lord sustained him. Satan will attack us at our weakest point in our weakest time. Like I said, the loss of a loved one. Satan will attack. It could be when everything seems to go wrong. You know, like it seems like every time we turn around, something is going wrong. And that's when Satan and his demons go there, like I said, they're licking their chops, saying, "We got him now," or her. I have mentioned the book several times of C.S. Lewis, Screwtape Letters. You know, so many times that's when, you know, the I guess he was this one demon was teaching this senior demon was teaching this junior demon and how him to attack this individual just professed Christ and work on his weak points and things such as that. But and that's what happens. That's the way Satan works a lot of times. He works on our weak points. David then speaks of a large place the Lord brought him to. You know, this suggests a safe place that would offer comfort. It was a place where David was free from danger of his enemies and could rest. I believe we all have, and I'm not talking about these safe places they're talking about, like on colleges and stuff, go to, but it's a place that I think we can go to be with God, a quiet place. Hmm? Safe in the arms of Jesus, yes. And I think we all, and really I have our place that I can go out on that place and be alone and be with God, and it's a place of I can't think of the word, but a sanctuary, in other words, and each one has it. Maybe driving down the road in our car, a place where we're alone with God. It can be so many places. Working in a garden, It's so many places that we can just be alone. I'm not going to, but I promised myself several years ago when we had a garden, I was on my hands and knees pulling up weeds, and I said, what am I doing? I promised myself when I was a kid I'd never do this when I got when I had to go out there and pull weeds.
You think you're going to get them all?
I know it. Yeah, and then you get covered up with chiggers and everything. Yeah. Yeah. Right. But God rescued David and provided him with a place of comfort and safety for an important reason. He delighted in David. He took pleasure in David as his servant and his child. In other words, he loved David. While he was not perfect, the Lord knew that he was David's heart. That's probably a question we need to ask ourselves. Does the Lord have our heart? Our complete and total heart? You know, sometimes we want to reserve a little piece of it, you know, and not give it all to him. You know, when we accepted Christ our Savior, we gave our heart to him. Sometimes we may want to take a little bit of it back. But that's a question I think we need to ask ourselves is, does God have our heart, our total heart? So I'm going to read now verses 20 through 24.
Lord rewarded me according to my righteousness, according to the cleanness of my hands hath he recompensed me. For I have kept the ways of the Lord, and have not wickedly departed from my God. For all his judgments were before me, and I did not put away his statutes from me. I was also upright before him, and kept myself from mine iniquity. Therefore hath the Lord recompensed me according to my righteousness, according to the cleanness of my hands in his eyesight.
When David said he was rewarded on the basis of his righteousness, he did not mean that he had earned God's favor through his works. You know, some can misinterpret this. But being righteous meant being made right with God. And like that being righteous is being made right with God. It doesn't mean, look at me, I'm more righteous than them heathens that I sit with in church. They're a bunch of sinners. You know, that we self-elevate ourselves above the others. And we've known people, and I'm not going to ask show of hands, they were guilty of that. I'm more righteous I'm more righteous than these others, you know, that I meet in church with. You know, they've got a lot to learn. You know, I've arrived. You've seen that. I mean, I've arrived. But with David, it was not a pretentious or conceited boast of sinless perfection. Rather, it's a claim that, in contrast to his enemies, he had devoted himself, heart and life, to the service of the Lord. David had not reached perfection, though. Ephesians 2:8 and 10. Who's got that? Butch, that's you.
Grace are you saved through faith, and that not of yourselves, it is the gift of God, not of works, lest any man should boast. For we are his workmanship, created in Christ Jesus, unto good works which God hath before ordained that we should walk with him.
Yes. I don't remember whether it was Jeremiah or Jeffries this morning. If there's just one little minute thing you can do to earn salvation, it don't work. Nothing you can do. No matter how great you may think you do or what you have to do, and it's and even if it's one little bitty portion of minute, it's not it. It's not working. Although being righteous started on the inside, David demonstrated his commitment to God through his actions. You know, what the saying was saying, actions speak louder than words. Along with a clean heart, he also lived with clean hands. What he said and what he did validated his relationship to the Lord. You know, it's more than just what's inside. It's what we show, what's on the outside. And so many times, gosh, Jeremiah said something today, and I thought, gosh, you know, that hits home. What you are in private is who you are. Boy, that can hit home. And that says a lot.
You are who you are when no one's looking.
That's right. That's another way of saying it. You are what you are when no one else is looking.
We actually had a pastor that didn't believe we were the same at church as we were at home.
Mm-hmm.
He goes,
Right.
He figured it out after a few years.
Yeah.
Well, when you're stuck in a truck together, you better be.
Right. That was y'all's safe place.
Seriously, he did not
Mhm.
believe we were the same.
Yes.
We are.
Sure.
Who we are.
Right. Mm. I-
Well, what you are at home, it's not good, it'll eventually surface.
Yeah.
It will.
Right.
You never know what situation.
Yes.
Yeah, that's a fact.
Yes.
And it will.
Yes. Right. And it will. And but like you said, what he said and what he did validate his relationship with the Lord. He was forgiven. And that's something I think sometimes that Satan keeps attacking us on, that maybe our past or something, but we're forgiven. We're forgiven. Yes. And I think David grasped that. He understood that he has been forgiven. And his slate was wiped clean. Ours is wiped clean. You know, it's we have a problem. God forgives and forgets. We can forgive but don't forget. And but Satan keeps reminding us. Yes, there's a warfare.
I've had that talk with a lot of young men.
Mm-hmm.
I'll accept God's forgiveness, but I can't forgive myself.
Right.
And I'll just ask him, so you're greater than God.
Yes. Right. That's so true. Yeah. But has he? We better go on, hadn't we? Oh yeah, sure it does. And that's I think human nature, some of it. And
That's when you sing Amazing Grace.
yes, Amazing Grace.
Like that song I sang, I'm clean,
Mm-hmm.
and I've got to remember
Well,
that.
I still like that verse 16. He pulled us out of raging waters. He pulled us out of waters, and he didn't dunk us back again. You know, let us go. But you know, along with but along with a clean heart, he also lived, like I said, with clean hands. What he said and what he did validated his relationship with the Lord. Like I said earlier, he was forgiven. As he was running for his life from Saul, David maintained a righteous heart and clean hands. Boy, you talk about someone that can want to get vengeance, or get even. Twice he had a chance to kill Saul, but refused. Remember when Saul entered the cave, David cut that piece of his garment, and then another time when Saul was asleep in camp, had his guards all around him. David and was one, I can't remember, went with him. And he took his spear. His spear was stuck beside him. Took his spear, and I think it was his water. Yeah, and walked out there, I guess, on the side of a hill and said, "Hey, Saul, guess what I got?" You know, he could have taken it. What? Whoa, yes. But Scripture says God put him in a deep sleep, and but like I said, twice he could have taken Saul's life and didn't, and refused because he was God's anointed. And David remembered that. He knew that. And he'd be messing with God's anointed. Remember the one that came and told him that Saul and Jonathan had been killed? And he said he brought his sword and everything. Well, he lied, for one thing. I think on the way he kind of roughed himself up and made it look like him. But what did he do? He lost his life. In other words, he put him to death. I said Saul wasn't dead yet, so I finished him off. Well, that was a mistake. And yeah, Abishai. Yeah, the one I went with. Okay, good. But like I said, David demonstrated his devotion to the Lord by living according to his ways. As he sought to please the Lord, he gave himself to taking God's word to heart and applying it to life. I believe David was assured in knowing, like I said earlier, that God had forgiven him. And you know, that's tough. Satan will continue to remind you of our past sins and when God has forgiven you, or forgiven us for our sins. He will remind us. He brings it up. How can you serve God considering your past sins? How can you talk to someone about their sin when you're a sinner? And you know, that's come up. That's come up. Satan is using that. You know, I always think of it. You know, I quote Bob Harrington once in a while. He's talking about he said he had an X-rated dream. He said, I was on the side of the bed, kneeling on the side of the bed, asking God for forgiveness. And my wife asked, said, "What are you doing?" I said, "I had an X-rated dream, and I'm asking God forgiveness." She said, "Well, tell me." He said, "No, God will forgive and forget. You'll forgive but won't forget." Now, whether that's true or not, I don't know. But like you said, how can you talk to someone? How can you live the life? How can you serve when your past sins, and they resurface when Satan brings them up and reminds you? But in the wilderness, the Lord commanded his people to obey his judgments, his ordinances and statutes. Leviticus 18:4 through 5.
You must observe my regulations, and you must be sure to walk in my statutes. I am the Lord your God. So you must keep my statutes and my regulations. Anyone who does so will live by keeping them. I am the Lord.
Yes, and David took the Lord's commands seriously by stating, I have not disregarded his statutes, which means that he had paid attention to obeying God's law. David continued to pile up language in his own defense. I was blameless or upright toward him. David believed that no one could find fault in him. The Lord had protected him because he was a man of integrity. That says a lot. He was a man of integrity. Like I said, David wasn't sinless, but he was a man of integrity. He didn't wear a mask of faithfulness to the Lord in order to shroud or cover his sinful lifestyle. And I think we all, I'm not one to say we air our dirty laundry, but it's something we don't hide either, because we're all guilty of sin. I've heard some say, I hear people talk about their past and how bad it was and how bad they were, and some say I kind of get to the point of thinking they miss it, and when they dwell on it so much. I've said, when we moved back here and joined the church, and we've got people that have come since we've joined, I can take each one as you are. I don't really care to hear about your past or what it was. That you were the meanest and worst person in town. And when I was working out in West Texas, I was going to church, and the pastor said, I believe this church got some of the sorest, meanest men that ever lived. Every one of them had a worse life than the other one. But
Call myself as mean, but I was stupid.
oh yeah, I was stupid. Yeah, me too. I was stupid. Yeah, me too. Yeah. Yes, that's right. But despite the stress created by his enemies, David avoided iniquity to the best of his ability. And I like that, best of his ability. David still had problems. David still had stress, temptations come to him. Yes, he still had struggles. Again, he was not perfect, but he placed his unwavering trust in God. I repeat, he knew he had been forgiven of his sins. That's so important, I think, in our lives, to know we have been forgiven. They had been wiped away. Like I said, wiped away, the slate marked clean. David repeated his testimony about his righteousness and cleanliness of hands in verse 20. He also added an important phrase. He noted he was blameless in the eyes or sight. For David, and ultimately as well as us, it is not how we evaluate our own actions that counts in the end, but how God weighs our actions that matter. Oh yeah, that's right. Oh yeah. The question is, are our actions right in God's sight? It's not, I'm okay, you're okay. Who wrote that book?
I had to do a book report on that.
Okay.
And had I understood then what I understood now, I would have just brought a picture of Christ on the cross.
Oh yes, right. Well, I read it too, and I can't remember his name. Supposedly he was a Christian, but I can't remember. I can never say it. I'm okay, you're okay, but Steve's looking it up good. But what are you in the sight of God? It's a good question. Although David committed adultery with Bathsheba and arranged her husband's death, he eventually returned to God's plan. Confronted with his sinful behavior, he repented and sought God's forgiveness and mercy. I always thought, boy, Nathan had a lot of guts.
Thomas Anthony Harris.
Okay, that's not who I was thinking of, but that Anthony Harris. There's another one, I can't remember his name. He had a radio program too, but anyway, But you know, I always thought I had a lot of respect in Nathan. Boy, him come to the king and say it was you. Boy, he could have said, "All right, cut his head off right now." And
Probably was going through that. I better not say this, and the words are just flying out of his mouth.
probably, yeah. But his example reminds us that being righteous does not mean being perfectly sinless. It means being acceptable to the Lord. Psalm 19:14.
Let the words of my mouth and the meditation of my heart be acceptable and pleasing in your sight, O Lord, my strength and my redeemer.
Yes, not being perfectly sinless, but being acceptable to the Lord. What? Mm-hmm. Someone read now verses 25 through 29.
With the merciful thou wilt show thyself merciful. With an upright man thou wilt show thyself upright. With the pure thou wilt show thyself pure, and with the forward thou wilt show thyself forward. For thou wilt save the afflicted people, but wilt bring down high looks. For thou wilt light thy candle. The Lord my God will enlighten my darkness. For by thee I have run through a troop, and by my God have I leaped over a wall.
David affirmed the reason for being faithful to the Lord. He had complete confidence in the Lord, being merciful, faithful, kind, depends on your translation you're looking at, but it's all the same, being merciful, being faithful, and being kind to him. In Matthew 25:21 through 23, Jesus taught his disciples about God's mercy in his parable about a master who distributed money to his servants. He affirmed the servants who had been loyal to him with what he had given them. Rewarding them demonstrated his faithfulness to them. Being upright had to do with being a person of integrity. God's people who live with integrity avoid being pretentious or hypocritical in relationship with him. Pretentious means usually making unjustified or excessive claims. In other words, lying. Being pretentious. We've heard that word many times. They're a pretentious person. Well, it means they're liars. They're lying. It said instead they demonstrate complete sincerity as they follow him. Their integrity reflects the Lord's influence in their lives. John wrote in 1 John 3:7 through 9 that Christians who seek to be upright prove that they belong to the Lord. You know, I was thinking, many times back in the past, I don't like to do it anymore, borrow money. I just hated to borrow money. But back when you're younger and things that you borrowed money. But I'd go to the local bank. That's back in the days when you can just go talk to the banker and tell them your sob story and all this. But you know, I've gone there several times. I borrowed money at a local bank, and the banker would always ask, "Would your dad be willing to co-sign?" And I would tell them yes, he would, and the banker would say, "That's better than any collateral the bank would ask for." And you know, I always told my kids a good word is one of the best things you can give your children. And I thought, you know, that was to me, you know, even though it was my dad, I'm bragging, but that was a man of integrity, a man of trust. And I hope and pray that I carried that on. And my children carried it on. People of integrity and trust that aren't pretentious and not liars, in other words. But David affirmed the Lord's purity as well as his faithfulness and integrity. He also noted that God's people should strive to reflect pure lives as they serve him. In John's first epistle, he taught that believers belong to the Lord as his children. As we look toward Christ's return, that should motivate us to strive toward spiritual purity that imitates his purity in 1 John 3:1 through 3. Others choose a forward path that leads them to a warped and twisted lifestyle. The word forward can mean ornery. Have we ever known any ornery people? Yep. Have we ever been ornery? Now, I won't ask for show of hands there either. Yeah, according to your mother. Yeah, my mother, ornery. Yeah, us.
Kids will be the
Yeah, yeah. But have you ever known an ornery? What it means? It's a mean person. An ornery, mean person. We've all known them. But David warned that the Lord would hold people accountable for their foolish choices. No, gosh. I'm going to be standing there in that judgment seat a long time for my foolish choices. I said, you remember when? I thought you were supposed to wipe that clean. Yeah, but she said.
I said, let's talk about this. Oh,
Yeah, let's talk about, yes. Be like Bob Harrington said, no, you won't forget. You don't share it with them. But God will judge their actions and their evil plans. David assured God's people that they could put their complete trust in the Lord. Along the way, oppression would strike them. Humbled by poverty or affliction, they could depend on Him to save them. No matter what comes along in our life, we can depend on God to save Him. I keep going back to that verse. He'll draw us out of that water. But on the other side, God has promised to humiliate the proud. David reflected on what the Lord had done for him by using a picture of a candle that drove away darkness to describe the Lord's influence in his life. I remember, and I brought it up before, and I think Les was talking about, used to be a program on TV when I was a kid. Of course, you couldn't get but 3 channels then. And it was a Catholic priest in the, what? Yeah, but the theme song was if everyone lit just one little candle, what a bright world this would be. And I think it's the Catholic Hour or something like that. But yeah, I remember that. Sheen, right. And I always remember that. And didn't convert me. But yeah, that is, you go in here, turn all the lights off. And there comes just one candle lit that lights up the room. But as everyone lights a candle, it illuminates more and more of that room. I know Kempner, First Baptist Kempner, they have no windows in their sanctuary. And I heard a story of my daddy when he was over leading the singing, and he told someone to, said, okay, I'm going to call such and such number, and you turn the lights off. And so he called this number to sing, and he turned the lights off. People said, well, I can't see. And he said, well, you're not going to be able to see if we don't start paying our bills. You'd have to know my daddy. But Jesus said in John 8:12, I am the light of the world. He who follows me will not walk in darkness, but will have the light of life. Throughout his life, David faced incredible challenges, but God helped him each time. So David declared that the Lord's presence kept him from being afraid. The Lord gave him the courage to charge any troop and strengthen him to overcome any wall. I can see him saying that, well, I can jump over any wall and jump over the wall. And when God led him into battle, that there was nothing too large and too great for him, that he'll strengthen us in the same. I keep saying he will pull us out of them raging waters. Any comments? We've got a few minutes here.
Something you said earlier, and it popped this proverb into mind.
Mm-hmm.
All a person's ways seem pure to them, but motives are weighed by the Lord.
Oh, yes. Yes. That's so true.
We were talking earlier too about looking at someone else's sin.
Mm-hmm.
They're worse than I am. But Galatians goes, 6:3 says, for it is anyone who thinks himself to be something when he is nothing.
Mm-hmm.
Sees himself.
Oh, yeah. Yes, that speaks a lot. Speaks volumes, really. And we may, I'm not guilty at one time or another, that have been there and think, well, we're a little more righteous than they are, and things such as this. But as we grow and mature and dwell in the Scriptures, God will reveal that to us.
We have to be very careful what we say to people.
Oh, yes. Yes.
When that person said that to me, it just brought,
Mm-hmm.
well, I would have never done that.
Yeah.
Anything like that. And it hurt.
Yeah.
It just brought so much up. We have to be
Mm-hmm.
really, really
Yeah.
you know, because we don't know who
Mhm.
we're talking to.
Right.
They're pastors,
Yes.
so,
Mhm.
you know,
Yeah.
it's,
Yeah. Oh yeah. And I visited the other day. I think it's Friday with the gentleman from the city, and I got talking to him about some of the things I know of past and everything. He said, "Boy, I want to just pick your brain with all your past and everything." Well, there's some things I'm not going to tell. Right? Don't ask.
yeah,
Hmm.
definitely.
Yeah. And but it is. I mean, and it's so. Like I said, we're so human. I guess that Satan knows our weaknesses, and he knows where to attack us.
Got a lot of
And-
experience with that.
Oh yeah, I do too. And I think we all have a lot of experience at that.
He's got thousands of years of
Mhm.
experience. That,
Yes.
the rushing water, you're standing there,
Yeah.
you're just overtaken, and all these distractions are coming at you, and Satan's hitting you
Yeah.
left and right, and the next thing you know, you're just swept away,
Yeah.
standing on the solid rock.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that's what was so cool, even though that happened, I had pastor to go to talk to, I had Wayne
Yeah.
to talk
Mhm.
to, and
Yeah.
pray through everything, you know.
Hmm.
If I didn't have that,
Yeah.
it's great to,
Yeah.
It's something you follow. Well, we share one another.
yeah.
Mhm.
I like what you said, Butch, because he didn't stay there in that position.
Right.
Because if you read right on in the chapter, it says, "It is God who arms me with strength and keeps my way secure. He makes my feet like the feet of a deer. He causes me to stand on the height. He trains my hands for battle. My arms can bend and pull."
Yeah.
And
Right.
he goes onto that vein.
Mhm.
He's not going to leave you where you're at.
Right.
You're getting beat like that. He's going to
Right.
give you the strength to get up and do what he
Right.
does.
Yeah. I found out that I should have stayed on that rock instead of trying to on that rock. Yeah. Yeah. Ken's showing me his watch. I guess we better go. Les, would you dismiss us, please?
Heavenly Father, we just thank you for the rain, and Lord, we just thank you for all that you do for us.
Yes,
Thank
Lord.
you for your faithfulness, Father. We thank you for your wisdom is righteous